The brain is made up of tiny nerve cells called neurons. These neurons have tiny branches that reach out and connect to other neurons to form a neural net. Each place where they connect is integrated into a thought or a memory. Now, the brain builds up all its concepts by the law of associative memory. For example, ideas, thoughts, and feelings are all constructed and interconnected in this neural net, and all have a possible relationship with one another. The concept and the feeling of love, for instance, is stored in this vast neural net. But we build the concept of love from many other different ideas.
We also get the concept of love from a much baser instinct, lust. This instinct exists in many species of life, particularly in mammals and birds. It exists in different ways, of course, but an example is that certain species of bird pair and mate for life, whereas certain mammals, primates and felines for example, tend to have different partners over the course of their life. The concept of love is one that we've built up based on our intuitions, feelings, and the accepted conventions of society. In many cases it can be wonderful. In other cases it can be a horrifying experience. Whatever the case may be, it is not entirely down to associative memories. The discussion on associative memories and the synapses in the brain, however, is a reasonable one that would pass muster in a high school science class.
Some people have love connected to disappointment. When they think about love, they experience the memory of pain, sorrow, anger, and even rage. Rage may be linked to hurt, which may be linked to a specific person, which then is connected back to love.
Every observation can be looked upon as a quantum measurement.
Really? This is a misapplication of scientific knowledge all over again. We have segued from a discussion of the brain and associative memories to a discussion that every observation can be discussed as a quantum measurement, which is not necessarily true. Take a look at the human eye, for example, and microscopic measurements.
This quantum measurement produces memory. We always perceive something after reflection in the mirror of memory.
I see what he did there. There is evidence that quantum electrical activity can occur within the brain, but let's be careful how deeply we speculate on it, shall we?
It is this reflection in the mirror of memory that gives us that sense of I-ness.
I said let's be careful how far we take this speculation. Conflating our ability to recognize our own reflection in a mirror with the field of quantum physics is a bit too much of a stretch for me. For the record, cats often recognize themselves in mirrors after they've gotten used to their existence.
Who I am.
The brain does not know the difference between what it sees in its environment and what it remembers, because the same specific neural nets are then firing.
Mr. Dispenza is making an utterly baseless claim. Our awareness of the current situation, an awareness that is rooted in the brain's processing centers, allows our brain, who we are, to differentiate between a memory event and an event that is taking place at the present time in which we are experiencing. So contrary to what Mr. Dispenza is claiming, our brains do have the ability to tell the difference between retrieved memories and experiential events taking place.
We know physiologically that nerve cells that fire together wire together. If you practice something over and over again, those nerve cells have a long-term relationship. If you get angry on a daily basis, if you get frustrated on a daily basis, if you suffer on a daily basis, if you give reasons for the victimization in your life, you're rewiring and reintegrating that neural net on a daily basis, and that neural net now has a long-term relationship with all those other nerve cells called an identity. We also know that nerve cells that don't fire together no longer wire together.
The subject of memory recall is a fascinating topic, and one which I would encourage everyone to read up on. Mr. Dispenza's statements, while being true to an extent, do not support the notion that one's experiences lead them to either being able to learn telepathic control of the world around them, or being eternally unable to do so because, quote, they just don't imagine it's possible, end quote.
They lose their long-term relationship because every time we interrupt the thought process that produces a chemical response in the body, every time we interrupt it, those nerve cells that are connected to each other start breaking the long-term relationship. If we practice our mental rehearsal and our skill in being able to do it, will show that certain brain circuits will grow as a result of our effort. It'll get easier to do, in other words. If we accept that idea, then it will allow us to go back the next day and do it with more certainty and with more acceptance. That in itself is no different than praying. You see, there's no religious text that says thought doesn't matter. There's no religious text that doesn't say your prayer and your intention shouldn't be answered by God. But explaining how that happens is what quantum physics and the observer is all about.
Conflating religion with science is not appropriate. Just because people praying daily for salvation is a learned trait that is reinforced over time, it does not mean it is okay to say that quantum physics is all about explaining how this happens. And as I've stated before, quantum physics concerns itself with, you guessed it, quantum physics.
But still, when we can make thought more real than anything else, our brain is designed to do that.
Of course it is. So where's your evidence?
The frontal lobe, with its enormous space, is the altar in which we place a thought. And it gives us the permission to hold the thought for an extended period of time, and it lowers the volume to the external stimuli. We lose track of time and space.
That's a matter of opinion. Some people do not lose their awareness of their surrounding environment when they think about things. Depending on what I do, sometimes I can become slightly less aware, especially if I'm deep in thought concerning a task. It really depends on the individual.
That's the moment we're stepping into the quantum field. That's the moment that now we're making thought more real than anything else.
And on that note, Mr. Dispenza is providing us with even more speculative pseudo-scientific nonsense. Being absorbed by your thoughts such that you become less aware of your surrounding environment does not make your thoughts more real than anything else. I wonder if Mr. Dispenza would say the same thing if he was working in an office one day, thinking about quantum mysticism, and then suddenly finds himself startled out of his reverie by a car colliding through the outer wall or window.
We are physically, chemically, emotional human beings. That's not a bad thing.
I'm glad we can agree on this.
It only becomes a limitation when we keep accessing those same emotions and those same attitudes on a daily basis and go nowhere in terms of our change or evolution in our life.
How can we say that we have lived fully every day? By simply experiencing the same emotions that we're addicted to every day.
It's not as simple as that, my dear. Sometimes we face the same emotions that we have had before because we are facing the same situations that we have experienced before. And while it is relatively easy to change one's thoughts if they have the means to live comfortably, unlike most people on this planet, it's not so easy to change a difficult situation. Indeed, some difficult situations take time, and trying not to think negatively about specific emotions is an uphill struggle. This is not to say that one shouldn't try to do as suggested here, just to say that following the same emotions daily isn't necessarily down to being addicted to them, as Ms. Knight has suggested is the case.
What we're actually saying is, I have to reconfirm who I am, and my personality is, I have to do this, I have to go here, I have to be that.
Isn't that just a little arrogant of you to suggest that this is the case for most people? The simple fact is, Ms. Knight doesn't occupy people's minds, and therefore has no idea what is really going on there.
A master is quite a different cat. It is one that sees the day, is an opportunity in time to create avenues of reality and emotions that are unborn, of realities that are unborn, that the day becomes a fertilization of infinite tomorrows.
And now we've returned to more meaningless word salad. Making good on opportunities presented to oneself is a great thing, which I fully support for those in a position to grasp said opportunities. But let's not confuse that with validating this idea of quantum mysticism.
There's a part of the brain called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is like a little mini factory, and it is a place that assembles certain chemicals that matches certain emotions that we experience. Those particular chemicals are called peptides. They're small chain amino acid sequences. The body's basically a carbon unit that makes about 20 different amino acids all together to formulate its physical structure. In the hypothalamus, we take small chain proteins called peptides, and we assemble them into certain neuropeptides or neurohormones that match the emotional states that we experience on a daily basis. So there's chemicals for anger, and there's chemicals for sadness, and there's chemicals for victimization. There's chemicals for lust. There's a chemical that matches every emotional state that we experience. And the moment that we experience that emotional state in our body or in our brain, that hypothalamus will immediately assemble the peptide that then releases it through the pituitary into the bloodstream. The moment it makes it into the bloodstream, it finds its way to different centers or different parts of the body. Now, every single cell in the body has these receptors on the outside.
And one cell can have thousands of receptors studying its surface, kind of opening up to the outside world. And when a peptide docks on a cell, it literally, like a key going into a lock, sits on the receptor surface and attaches to it and kind of moves the receptor. And it's kind of like a doorbell buzzing, sends a signal into the cell.
This is a rather simplistic explanation of what really happens within the human body, but I'll let it pass. We're going to skip over the theatrics that follow, with the exception of the voiceovers from Mr. Dispenza that are interspersed.
What happens in adulthood is that most of us who've had our glitches along the way are operating in an emotionally detached place, or we're operating as if today were yesterday.
Change in itself means then that we have to abandon our old self.
Not necessarily. Sometimes change means that we have to accept certain pieces of ourselves are what they are, and that some other pieces of ourselves that are better left behind or don't contribute to the essential core of our beings can be replaced or otherwise worked upon. Throwing the baby out with the bathwater is not always a good thing. I'm going to skip over the rest of the philosophical discussions. They are not based on factual claims, and therefore are not really for critical analysis, when much of what is discussed is valid or invalid depending on any given person's opinion.
Our experiences color what we know.
Who is Daniel Monti? He's an MD from the University of New York at Buffalo School of Medicine. He received his medical doctorate in 1992, postdoctoral work at the Research Scholars Program, Department of Psychiatry and Human Behavior at Jefferson Medical College, Philadelphia. The Chief of Complementary Medicine, Department of Psychiatry and Human Behavior, Jefferson Medical College, and Director of the Mind-Body Medicine for the Myrna Brind Jefferson Center for Integrative Medicine, Thomas Jefferson University.
So there is no completely objective appraisal of anything, because our appraisal of everything has to do with our previous experiences and our emotions. Everything has an emotional weighting to it.
His statements are a fair criticism of the nature of human bias, which is why the scientific method mandates peer review in order to eliminate, as much as possible, human biases when discussing and testing hypotheses. We are skipping over the following explanation of how certain chemicals attach to certain cells in the body, as we've already heard it before. However, I would like to draw your attention to this.
Each cell is definitely alive.
This is not debatable and has been known for some time.
And each cell has a consciousness, particularly if we define consciousness as the point of view of an observer.
Unfortunately, this is complete nonsense. Consciousness, as I've already stated, requires a substrate to exist within. Cells are simply organic mechanisms that have a specific job to do within a body. Cells have never been demonstrated to be conscious of anything. And no, an autonomic reaction to external stimuli does not equate to consciousness. Further compounding the error with an appeal to a redefinition of what consciousness is simply fallacious nonsense.
There is always the perspective of the cell. The cell knows where it is. The cell knows where it's going. The cell knows what proteins it's making. The cell knows whether it's about to divide or whether it's in a program to stop dividing. In fact, the cell is the smallest unit of consciousness in the body.
I'm hungry.
And after that rather infantile cartoon representation and the further compounding of the error Ms. Pert made a moment ago, we can only conclude the following. That an autonomic response which cells are pre-programmed to carry out does not equate to consciousness. After all, you wouldn't confuse a virus with a conscious life form, nor would you confuse a computer which has been programmed with instructions on what tasks to perform with a conscious form of any kind, living or otherwise. So why would you assume that a single cell would have this ability? Note that some proposals have been made that cells have consciousness, but the only paper I found on the subject, which isn't even a paper but is hosted at University College London, itself admits that this is all conjecture, and yet Miss Pert is asserting it as though it were fact. That I find to be dishonest.
The cells are yelling up to the brain saying, we haven't gotten our fix today. And it's going to start sending impressions to the brain, and the brain is going to start to formulate imagery. It's going to sound like voices in our head.
I have to wonder what planet Mr. Dispenza is living on now. Cells might very well have certain properties that can signal to the surrounding environment a need for increased bodily resources, but that is not the same thing as consciously sending signals to your head and then you hearing voices.
I'm hungry.
To think of a reason why we should be depressed. Think of a reason why we should be confused. Think of a reason for our own suffering.
And this, by Mr. Dispenza, is caused by bodily cellular activity? Certain bodily conditions can induce depression in people, and it's not a particularly well understood field of study, so why is he acting as an authority on the subject when the scientists who are actively studying depression and anxiety in modern medicine are still trying to come to grips with the causes themselves? We are skipping the remainder of his explanation, as it really has no explanatory power at all, and is instead more meaningless speculation as to what our minds are being told by our bodies. It is nothing more than a setup for an appeal to their religious belief that will follow later.
We bring to ourselves situations that will fulfill the biochemical craving of the cells of our body by creating situations that meet our chemical need.
So, if a person suddenly develops a brain tumour, it's the brain responding to the body's chemical need to feel suffering, is it? What if a person is hit by a car that was rammed off the street by another car, and he or she never knew what hit them? That's the body's need to feel suffering too, is it? Frankly, this kind of discussion really bothers me, because it says that you will get everything taken care of if you just think positively. While positive thinking is a wonderful thing in some circumstances, it is not a magic cure, and it can even be destructive in the long run, especially in a terminally ill patient who, instead of getting their affairs in order, will instead act as if they are invincible by being all happy, smiles all the time, spending their day watching cartoons, going to comedy clubs, reading comic books, playing with children for fun, and enjoying constant walks all along the beach, rather than taking some of that time to get their affairs in order for the unfortunately likely event that they will pass away in the near future. Some things you just can't fix and can't change, no matter how much wishful thinking you do, and you have to recognize that, rather than live in a dreamland.
If you can't control your emotional state, you must be addicted to it.
This is also irresponsible. Some people have clinical depression, which is one of many possible types of depression that people can suffer from. Those who do suffer from clinical depression find that their emotional state is dictated by an imbalance of chemicals in their brain, which are very difficult to control. It could be either because of an inability to produce serotonin, an overproduction of cortisol, or someone might well have had a traumatic experience in their past that was so bad it had reconfigured their mind such that long-term therapy is the only means to treat it. Now, this is by no means an exhaustive exposé on the topic, and I have left out many aspects of the nature of the condition, but the point is this. When someone says, well, you must be addicted to it, it dismisses the very real problems that some of these people face. It's rather disgusting, actually. We are skipping Jay-Z Knight's comments and the theatrics that follow. They contribute nothing to the discussion, and I have no comment on them.
They have taken laboratory animals and they've hooked up electrodes in certain parts of their brain that produce those neuropeptides. And those neuropeptides are such strong chemicals that, given the fact that they train the laboratory animal to press a lever to get that chemical release, that neuropeptide release, it would choose the neuropeptide release more than hunger, more than sex, more than thirst, more than sleep. As a matter of fact, it went to the point of physical exhaustion and collapsed before it would take care of itself physically.
Mr. Dispenza's reference to the lab experiment can be found in the reference that I have provided. Suffice to say, it is a reasonable explanation. However,
and that's really what stress does to our body.
This does not logically follow. If Mr. Dispenza were to make reference to certain types of addictive substances, he might be correct. But to say people are addicted to stress, that they're making it happen because it's what we're asking for? Really?
We become so addicted to the stress in our lives that we can't quit our job.
The reason why people don't quit their jobs even if it stresses them out is because to do so creates even more stress. Being unemployed and earning no money is not a fun situation to be in.
We can't leave our relationship.
As for relationships, there are a whole host of reasons why people are unable to end abusive or stressful relationships, and it's not because of addiction to stress or abuse. Now, in some unlikely cases it may be, but more often than not, there is another reason behind it.
We can't make choices because the stimulus and responses produce the chemistry that clouds our choices.
And while it may be true that people are sometimes in a position not to make choices that are difficult and will disrupt their lives, it's not necessarily due to addiction to stress. It could be due to avoidance of fear, of the unknown, of the possibility that it might all go horribly wrong. Some people are undoubtedly better at handling this type of fear than others, and they are often successful. But to say that people stay in their situations because they are addicted to the emotions that it causes them, that's an unfounded assertion that doesn't take into account any of the other innumerable variables that may factor into individual lives that this man has no idea about. Let's listen to Jay-Z Knight.
So how can anyone really say they're in love with a specific person?
Really? This is coming from a woman who has had a string of failed marriages. She shouldn't really speculate on other people's feelings when she has such a poor track record herself.
For example, they're only in love with the anticipation of the emotions they're addicted to.
Such arrogance is not all too shocking when you consider the source. We are skipping the theatrics that follow. Mr. Dispenza has some more insights for us.
Everybody secretly is an adventurer. Everybody loves the adventure.
Not everyone. But I'll go along with this in the meantime.
It's just taking that first step.
I'll go along with this one too.
And once they have the moment of insight, that moment of insight carries frequency. It carries a message. The cells of the body are enlivened by possibility. They're enlivened by unknown potentials. They're enlivened by a future history or a future opportunity that may be down the rabbit hole a little further.
And that's where you lost me, Mr. Dispenza. While it is true that adventure can be exhilarating, unless this is entirely meant in terms of metaphor, which given some of the bizarre claims made throughout the movie so far, I have to doubt, then these statements about the cells enlivened by the potential for adventure are complete nonsense. The body reacts based upon the demands placed upon it. Sometimes that demand is generated by anticipation, but it is not at all the same thing as the cells being directly enlivened by the sense of adventure.
And if they allow themselves to experience the quandary and the mysticism and the possibility that when they emerge from the rabbit hole, you're a different person.
And there we have it, folks. Mysticism. Emerge from the rabbit hole. I think we've heard enough from Mr. Dispenza for now, don't you? We're skipping the remainder of his remarks, the theatrics that follow, and the repeated assertions from earlier that Jay-Z Knight has made.
Yes, it's a psychosomatic network, and yes, some of us, particularly adolescent boys are, under the control of lower centers.
No, Miss Pert, let's not discriminate. Adolescent girls too.
The eye isn't in control of the molecules of emotion. It's more, I don't want to say at the mercy of it, but these rapid eye movements that help us decide where to focus are mediated in the midbrain, and you can map opiate receptors there and receptors for many of the other peptides. So once again, the relevant search command that's going on is related to finding a certain emotional state.
So far I have no argument with this series of statements. Not that my opinion matters, but the evidence does support these assertions.
What about people who are addicted to sex?
Actually, sex itself is an invention to allow us to see into the future.
Is Dr. Wolf joking now?
Think about that for a while.
It appears not. Sexual desire is not an invention. It is a natural procreative act that furthers the propagation of a given species. If Dr. Wolf is suggesting that this essential fact is a means of predicting the future, I really don't know what to think anymore. As usual, it's time to skip the theatrics, although I must say in a certain light they are entertaining.
Our mind literally creates our body.
Actually, that would be the responsibility of the DNA sequences we possess. Our mind is part of the body. We have influence over how our body develops by making choices throughout our life to exercise or not, eat right or not, and of course, whenever we receive injuries, that influences our bodies. But that is not the same thing as the mind creates the body.
But it all starts in the cell. And who gives the cells the order? The orders come from the neural net in our brain.
Really? What about developing fetuses? The neural cluster does not begin to develop until well after the body of the fetus has begun developing in a pregnant woman. In any event, bodily growth is somewhat autonomous. Our brain doesn't handle every single aspect of our biology,
Which are based on the experiences and information that we've logged in there.
Again, what about newborn babies? Or zygotes? Or to go to the other end of the spectrum, someone who has been in a coma long term but whose body continues to function and grow older.
And we use a certain box of solutions to our life that causes chemistry to take place.
And what kind of box would this be, Mr. Dispenza?
So in order for us to change the chemistry, we would literally have to change the neural net, which means we'd have to change our identity, which means we'd have to change our attitude, or change the way in which we interact with our environment.
And so it is we have returned to the mind over matter mantra of the movie.
And every time we keep being the same person and keep experiencing the same attitudes, all we're doing is reinforcing ourselves as our identity.
And again, this greatly depends on the circumstances. Sometimes someone might well change their attitude to the life they are in, and nothing changes for them other than how they might feel. And in essence, nothing outside their thoughts has changed. We are skipping the explanation by Candace Pert about her time with heroin addicts. Suffice to say it's about a minute long, is essentially correct, and can be experimentally verified.
The person's mental life becomes dominated by pain, such that everything that they perceive is colored by the pain.
Yeah. This is what we call obsessive-compulsive behavior, where someone makes their life all about pain, or pleasure, or some other pattern of behavior that people tend to get stuck in. But not everyone suffers from this problem, and not everyone who has avoided this problem is a believer in mysticism. I'm going to take us past much of the film that follows. Essentially, there's a discussion about how the body reacts to stress and stress-related stimuli, delves into advanced cellular topics that are of no consequence to the premise and conclusion of the movie, and is surrounded by more movie theatrics. I will, however, play this one little clip here.
Now, all aging is a result of improper protein production. What happens when we age? Our skin loses elasticity. Well, elastin is a protein. What happens to our enzymes? We don't digest as well. What happens to our synovial fluid? Those are proteins. They become brittle and stiff. What happens to our bones? They become thin. So all aging is a result of improper protein production.
I would much rather get a proper explanation from a biologist than a chiropractor, but I digress. Aging is related to telomeric breakage. Telomerase is a substance that assists in the integrity of the structure of the cell as it divides. It makes it more difficult to divide the cells as the telomeres grow shorter. This is a problem that would win any scientist who solved it a Nobel Prize almost immediately and has been known about for some time. In summary, just because all of these bodily functions degrade over time and their core processes are the result of proteins does not mean that improper protein production is the sole cause of aging.
So then the question arises, does it really matter what we eat?
Yes.
And does nutrition really have an effect if the cell doesn't even have the receptor sites after 20 years of emotional abuse to even receive or let in the nutrients that are necessary for its health?
Yes, because this is complete nonsense. If none of the cells in the body had the proper ability to receive sustenance, you'd be dead. It's as simple as that. As long as you're still alive, it means that your body still has the ability to process enzymes and proteins. Even a high school student would be able to figure that one out. The rest of Mr. Dispenza's nonsense is going to be cut. Let's see what else this show has to say.
We will best know them by their addiction, their continuous, over 24 hours, in a continuum of what emotions they display in their body. We shall know their thoughts.
I believe that we have just found a rival for William Lane 2 citations Craig on the pseudo-philosophical front. Nothing that Ms. Knight said is of any use to anyone whatsoever. You want to know their thoughts from their emotions that they have in their body? I've heard of body language conveying someone's emotions, but for goodness sake.
We never, ever reincarnate to the I love you so much people. We always reincarnate to the situations of why we hate ourselves.
Reincarnation? Isn't that a Hindu belief? In any case, if reincarnation is an aspect of these people's belief systems, then it is no wonder they're so content on giving out such bad advice as to ignore the negative problems that they're having by changing your identity and not actually addressing the cause of the problems in the first place. And if anyone doesn't think this is what they're advising, I suggest you check out Fred Alan Wolf's other project, The Secret. It's all about the supposed law of attraction. Let's skip the theatrics again.
No one has ever came along and ever given you sufficient, intelligent knowledge about your beautiful self.
Wait, so Miss Knight now has secret esoteric knowledge about your intelligent, beautiful self, or words to a similar effect, that no one has ever told you about yourself? Really? Because I imagine people do that for other people all the time. It's how relationships often start for many. It's how friendships deepen, and it's how they can last whereas less nurturing ones fail. There's nothing secret or new about any of this, but it is presumptive to state that no one has ever told you how good you truly are. But then again, these kinds of belief systems do bring this out in people.
How you work from the inside out. Why do you have addictions? Because you have nothing better. You have dreamt of nothing better because no one has ever taught you how to dream better.
And again, more pseudo-philosophical nonsense. Further, how does Ms. Knight know what people have been taught and not taught? I'd really like to know.
If you don't see the traps, you have to go through the crap until you see the traps. Because if you don't see it, it's your only teaching machine. It's your only way for you to come to understand something new. So,
Any time now, Mr. Tiller.
the universe brings these things to your door. And there is learning in them for you if you are willing to reflect upon them.
Jesus can come to your house, and he will knock on your door, but you just have to be willing to welcome him into your home. Is any of this sounding at all familiar?
And think beyond the rigid mindset.
Now it's possible this is an attack on the mindset of people who are skeptical of outlandish claims. What Mr. Tiller is proposing is that we simply set aside our skepticism and accept what he is telling us. Unfortunately, in order to do that, we will also have to accept all other claims that have no evidence for them, such as the existence of unicorns, the spirit of Awa, flying pasta deities, celestial beverage makers, vampires, werewolves, people who can teleport on a whim. Exactly where do we draw the line, Mr. Tiller? More theatrics follow that have been cut.
When I talk about we disappearing, I don't mean that we physically disappear.
I would hope no, Mr. Dispenza. That would be completely unfounded and would require some pretty extraordinary evidence. But I'm sure that what you're about to assert is also going to be a little difficult to prove.
What I mean is that we move out of the area of the brain that has to do with our personality, that has to do with our association to people, our association to places, our association to things and times and events. We don't exist in the associative centers in our brain that reaffirms our identity and reaffirms our personality.
I can't even begin to tell you just how ridiculous this is. We don't exist in the associative centers of our brain. Maybe that's because we are our brain and everything within it. Our associative memories and everything that make up our personality is who we are. Without the brain, we wouldn't exist.
We now have science to back up what our thoughts do and how they make our bodies weak.
Another outright lie. Science is still working on the relationship between the body and the brain. But for the record, there are some things that can weaken our bodies, for example our immune systems, that has absolutely nothing to do with what we think or feel. This is as bad as her earlier claim that NASA are working on harnessing this incredible energy sea that they're actually not working on.
A lot of scientists who are actually studying this with behavioral kinesiology and other ways, showing that thoughts make your body weak.
Repeating a lie does not convert it to a fact.
And thoughts pretty much create your reality. They create what you're going to think about yourself.
Thoughts create what you are going to think about yourself. I think it's time for a double facepalm.
If you're fat but you think you're wonderful, you'll be wonderful.
But you'll still be fat. All you're doing is giving off a confidence that makes other people take notice. This is an aspect of behavioral science that is demonstrable, but it is not the kind of evidential support that these people are looking for when trying to propose that you can telepathically alter the world around you.
But most women we're compared all the time with impossible images, from Barbie to models, and so we think that our whole currency is how we look and how other people are going to perceive us, and we're always up against impossible standards.
Twice in this part of my analysis, Lynn McTaggart has said something that I actually agree with. While it is a good idea to be good health physically and active as opposed to a sedentary person, the media do hold women, and to a lesser degree some men, to an incredibly high standard that very few people would ever be able to attain. And those that do only do so due to a fluke of genetics, and in many cases they have to take on drastic behaviours in order to maintain this unrealistically high expectation of the media. This is something that desperately needs to change.
What is relative to their own emotional addiction are movies and dramas and news and all the media that is so beautiful today and providing people with experiences without having to be there.
What is your point, Miss Knight?
And yet, that does not define human greatness.
Then, by all means, please define what you think human greatness is. The universe is indifferent to our existence. There are well over 20 billion stars in our galaxy alone. We are orbiting only one of them. And we are only one of over 2 million extant species on our planet. So I have to ask, what is so great about us? We are destroying our planet because of greedy companies, corporations and people polluting our atmosphere and our environment, just to save a few bucks on their production costs so that they can squeeze a few more out of us in profit. And what are these people ever going to find to spend such enormous sums of money on? Human greatness? Don't make me laugh. Humans might very well have the potential to achieve a great many things, but we sure as hell aren't doing a very good job of it right now. Only those within the scientific community are really living up to that potential, and they're being starved of resources by cash-strapped governments who are pulling their budgets in order to reallocate that money elsewhere. Doctors and nurses are struggling to treat people who are sick, many of them sick through their own lifestyle choices or because of the actions of other people, all the while having to deal with bureaucratic nonsense, and in the case of privatized healthcare, having to also deal with profit-driven bean counters who also want to make a quick buck. Everywhere you look, there are examples of humans who are far from great, so it really is one hell of a stretch to use the term human greatness. I'll finish up this response by stating again, humans do have potential, but let's not get too big-headed about it.
So hypnotized by their environment through the media, through television, through people living and creating ideals that everybody struggles to become, that no one can actually become in terms of physical appearance and definitions of beauty and valor, that are all illusions, that most people surrender and live their life in mediocrity.
And many people who do achieve a life less ordinary do not go the mysticism route that this production is espousing. So through all of these philosophical meanderings, have these people really told us anything that hasn't already been pointed out by other people who are not mystics? It doesn't appear to be the case.
And they may live that life, and the soul may never really, their desire may never really rise to the surface, so they may want to be something else. But if it does rise to the surface, and they ask themselves if there is something more, or why am I here? What is the purpose of life? Where am I going? What happens when I die? they start to ask those questions, they start to flirt and interact with the perception that they may be having a nervous breakdown. And in reality, what they're doing is that their old concepts of how they viewed their life in the world start to fall apart.
And you can assert this how? While you're all thinking about that, it's time to skip past some more theatrics as well as some philosophical meanderings.
It's the only planet in the Milky Way that has habitation that is steeped in enormous subjugation of religion.
Wait, what? The only planet in the galaxy that is habitable, steeped in religious traditions and subjugation? Where's your evidence that ours is the only planet with these things? For one thing, in the last 4 years alone, we've discovered almost 100 exoplanets around star systems in our locality, and at least 5 of them are potential candidates for the presence of life from a habitation zone, mass, and location point of view. It's rather a stretch to claim that we are alone.
You know why that is? It's because people have set up right and wrong.
So, because society has set up a list of boundaries about what's acceptable and not acceptable, this means that we are the only planet with religious subjugation? Perhaps we should lift the ban on killing people or stealing things. Give me a break. Society has rules to ensure the survival of members of that society. And while some of those rules are outdated and could do with updating or removing altogether, that doesn't mean we should ignore the fact that some things are considered right or wrong for a very good reason.
I did say there is no right and wrong. Does that mean that it's a free-for-all? Absolutely not.
And that would be because society sets boundaries on what people can do in order to allow everyone a certain degree of freedom and protection.
I mean, the problem that I have with right and wrong in those categories is not that I want a free-for-all, but that right and wrong doesn't go nearly far enough.
I won't even begin to speculate what this could mean. Mr. Ledworth has provided almost nothing for me to base a conclusion on.
They have never sinned. They have never wronged. Wronged, yes, in moral confrontations with society. But that's their adversity. That's why they're here. To wrong, to learn, to search, and use the wisdom of that to create yet greater dreams.
Humans may well be imperfect beings, with flaws and faults, aspirations and great potential, but creating greater dreams? Where did making things happen in reality go?
There's nobody keeping records up there. The records are here, and I'm going to have to deal with them. That's far more painful than a record-keeping God up in the skies.
I agree. At the end of the day, we all have to face up to whatever mistakes we have made and any we may make in the future.
So anyone who's setting out on the path of enlightenment will be absolutely impeccable in everything that they do.
Wait, what?
Is it because of fear of damnation? No. Or of the punishment of God? Or because I have sinned and haven't got forgiveness? No. I mean, these are all excuses that keeps us away from the real problem. The really enlightened person will see every action has a reaction with which I must deal.
And that isn't solely limited to people who believe in mysticism. Many people who are considered skeptics also follow the same guidelines for life, as do many people who believe in religions. Loosely believe, that is. The fundamentalists still fear punishment, of course.
And if I'm wise, I'm not going to do stuff that will cause me to have to face it and resolve it and balance it in my soul later.
Is that really the best motivator that you have for steering clear of wrongdoing? My motivation for not doing wrong to other people is not because I'll have to face up to it later. Not entirely, at any rate. In addition to this, the victim of any wrongdoing I would inflict on them would suffer as a consequence, and I don't want anyone to suffer, especially not as the result of my own actions. There seems to be a lot of religious discussion to follow, and since I initially started out on addressing some of the scientific claims and the attacks on the scientific method mentioned at the start of the movie, this content is superfluous and so I won't be commenting on it. All that can be surmised is this: all people are divine, God is a part of us all, that is how we are connected to everyone and everything, yada yada yada.
Because we live in those routine automatic programs we're unable to see because we're processing mind from the familiar.
Mr. Dispenza has made another assertion that he has no evidence to back up. And just because people are faced with routine situations every day doesn't mean they have no time or ability to think about things outside of their experience. I regularly fantasize about fiction and how the future will pan out, for instance. And I also like the idea of superpowers, despite the fact that they are not observed and have never been demonstrated. So I have time to think outside the box, so to speak. And no. My definition of thinking outside the box is not the same as meaningless speculation along the lines that quantum mysticism allows me to telepathically control the world around me.
There is enormous potential to change the kind of behaviors and characteristic patterns that we've fallen into.
I'm pretty sure that most people would realize this fact, myself included.
In fact, if you've listened and have remembered anything that I've said, your physiology is different than it was before that.
I'm not sure I'd go quite that far. Associative memory links would have been created. Synapses would have reconfigured to allow the creation of short-term memories with this information. But your physiology? That seems to be an instance of hyperbole.
That is something that Eric Kandel, the recent winner of the Nobel Prize in Medicine and Science, said very eloquently at a talk, that basically memory has been encoded, your genetic structure has changed, and while we previously would talk about the nervous system as this very rigid thing that didn't have much capacity for change.
In what context are we referring to when we talk about change? Depending on the context, this statement can either be true or false. Not enough data has been provided.
We now know that on many levels that isn't true. And actually there's a tremendous amount of plasticity, which basically means ability to change within the nervous system.
There is a field of science known as neuroplasticity. Throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, more evidence has been collected that support this neuroscience. It encompasses everything from cellular changes involved in learning to large-scale reconfigurations as a result of brain injury. The most widely recognized areas of plasticity are learning, memory, and recovery from brain damage. In essence, the brain is an amazing organ that can do a lot to recover from injury as well as reconfigure based on need.
And if you look at the structure of the human brain in detail, you see that it's specifically designed, it's carefully engineered.
At this point in the production, I have to wonder if Dr. Hagelin believes in some form of Vedic creationism given these statements. Our neurobiology has developed alongside the rest of our body as a response to selective pressure in our environment. There was nothing created about the brain.
To experience the unified field, to experience the unity of life.
And once again, Dr. Hagelin misuses the principle of quantum physics to peddle his pseudo-scientific claims.
We're all connected. I mean, I think the most fundamental thing is we're all connected by an energy field.
I don't suppose Ms. McTaggart has any evidence for this extraordinary claim.
We swim in a sea of light, basically, which is the zero-point field.
Funny we should talk about the zero-point field. It reminds me of the statements I made in response to the claims regarding this large energy sea. But again, the reason it's called zero-point energy is because trying to tap into it would create an energy debt in that portion of the space-time continuum. In any event, the statement made by Ms. McTaggart was again made sans evidence.
And I say, first of all, you get away from the whole idea of separateness, because separateness is the biggest problem of the world now.
And of course, when you take into account what Ms. McTaggart stated earlier in the movie, both science and religion are responsible for this idea of separateness. So, in order to comply with her wishes, we have to let go of our religious beliefs, which I obviously don't have a problem with, and our mechanisms for scientific inquiry, which then means we have no rigorous means of testing ideas and presuppositions with. Miss McTaggart, shall we go back to living in mud huts now and giving thanks to the people who helped us find this enlightenment, as opposed to the real enlightenment that can be found in the honest and unfettered pursuit of knowledge via scientific inquiry?
You take this notion of an entangled universe and you apply it to human experience.
You first need to demonstrate that such an application is valid to begin with, otherwise it's just speculative. Presenting such speculation as fact is inappropriate, to say the least.
Because human experience is part of the universe as well. And then you say, well, let's assume that experience is entangled, then how would it manifest? And we can start going through ways in which it could manifest. If there's a connection with another mind, we call it telepathy.
And I would call that an unfounded assertion. So like any good skeptic, I have to ask, where's your evidence, Dr. Radden?
If there's a connection to some other object somewhere else, we'd call it clairvoyance. If there's a connection that happens to transcend time, we'd call it precognition. If there's a connection in which my intention is expressed out in the world some way, we might call it psychokinesis.
And what would you say divination is? While we're at it, shall we look at reading tea leaves? Or maybe we can make wishes over chicken bones. I know. Let's get a cross and pray to it. If we accepted these kinds of pseudo-scientific propositions without evidence, then we may as well start praying to Apollo for guidance.
Or distant healing, or something of that sort. So you can go through a list of perhaps 12 kinds of psychic experience that have gotten labels over the years, like telepathy.
And for which all of them have had their claims of supporting evidence, and all of them have failed dismally to meet the burden of proof under rigorous testing methodologies that would conclusively demonstrate, were they real, that these things were possible.
But this is really just the tip of the iceberg.
Cup of tea, anyone? You might want to say yes. You'll get some tea leaves that you can then read.
People ask, why are you so interested in the Planck scale, the very ultimately tiny in terms of spirituality? Because obviously spirituality is out there, it's everywhere.
Sure. Now let's see the evidence for this claim, Mr. Hameroff.
And the answer is that yes, the Planck scale is the ultimately small, but it's also everywhere. Wherever you go, there it is.
Yeah. No shit, Sherlock.
And because it's holographic, it repeats at different scales, like fractals, throughout the universe.
Holographic? Oh boy. I didn't even know what to say to this nonsense. I'm going to cut the rest of this nonsense and summarize it for you. As a result, scores won't be tallied for the remaining sections save those few I examine next. Dr. Wolf asserts that quantum physics and spirituality are going to be merged as a field of study in the 21st century. Dr. Tiller then speculates about us all creating the future, and that we are all responsible for whatever is out there, so we can't turn our backs on it now. An obvious appeal to faith on the issue. Jay-Z Knight then makes reference to making the shift from me to one, whatever she's trying to say, I'm not sure. And Dr. Wolf comes back to assert that we are all capable of performing in this world of wonder and magic, further asserting that we will never die. Another obvious appeal to emotion by appealing to people's desire to live forever, but strangely also asserting that we were never born. Dr. Goswami then asserts that science has encountered free will for the first time, which is inaccurate. He further asserts that consciousness is free because there is no mathematical equation for the subject, which I feel is missing the point somewhat. Then we have a question asking us if all realities and all possibilities are playing out simultaneously, which is something of speculative nature that we have no evidence for, but which makes for great science fiction and sometimes interesting conversation. And then we come to a movie called Dr. Quantum Visits Flatland, a cartoon that asserts the existence of a two-dimensional world which has no concept of 3 dimensions. I'll play a short segment from the movie so I can address it here.
Hello, little circle. Fear of the unknown, or should I say not yet known. It's a puzzle. If we see only what we know, how does anyone ever see anything new? The unknown. How do we ever get out of our box?
By conducting scientific investigations into whatever new phenomena that we come across. This is the very essence of the scientific method. It is what allowed us to progress from stone castles and fear of retribution based on ridiculous fables and myths to space travel, instant worldwide communication, all of the creature comforts of home, worldwide travel, large-scale worldwide freight, computing power that far outstrips the human mind's ability to work on mathematical problems, and as a consequence is a major labour-saving device. One more thing.
And extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. Now, the problem is that people defending the conventional approach to consciousness, brain equals mind equals computer, behave as if they've got proof and we don't. And they got, okay, pardon me.
Mr. Hameroff, that is absolutely disgusting. Like any good religious fundamentalist, you ridicule the scientific community by saying they don't have evidence, and yet you present none yourself. Aside from the fact that this is a complete lie, such a double standard is a disgrace and is beneath a person of science, which therefore puts anyone interested in the honest pursuit of scientific inquiry in a very firm position above you. One final thing. The following clip was taken from a different version of the film that had different content.
So, a wonderful story that I believe is true is that when the Indians, the Native American Indians on the Caribbean islands, saw Columbus's ships approaching, they couldn't see them at all because it was so unlike anything they had ever seen before. They couldn't see it.
So they couldn't see Columbus's ships because it was unknown to them. So it's not possible for people to see things that they don't recognize. If this is true, then how the hell are we able to conduct any scientific experimentation whatsoever? Scientific inquiry by its very nature is acquiring knowledge. Funny thing about the acquisition of knowledge. In order to acquire knowledge, it has to be unknown for you to begin with. I think that's enough of that. Okay, the scores are displayed for all to see. How do you summarise a production like this? Well, I'll start by being blunt. It was absolutely piss poor. The number of errors you can see. The sheer amount of red herrings, falsehoods, factual errors, and misapplications of scientific fields are ludicrous, and the whole premise that quantum physics allows for magic and other bizarre things was not demonstrated whatsoever. The producers shun the scientific method and the scientific community, referring to them as conventional and the old lawful scientist ways of doing things, as though it were a bad thing. They badmouth the very thing that has allowed them to be able to film this production in the first place. And it is in some ways worse than creationism, because at least with creationists, most of them outright deny the scientific method, whereas these people are simply trying to hijack it. I have no problem with meditation and relaxation techniques, and I have met a lot of thoroughly decent people who believe in this particular brand of mysticism. But the truth claims are still unverified, and the evidence still does not support their premise. I've been accused of lacking in wonder by critiquing productions like this, and all I have to say in response is the following. I am a fan of scientific inquiry. The fact that we discover exoplanets is fascinating to me and suggests strongly that we are not alone in the universe. And while there is no evidence that it is even possible for any advanced civilization to send ships to us, nor is it likely they'd ever bother once they see how we are, I do like to imagine that it is possible. And I even imagine what would happen if it were going on today. I even like to imagine what it would be like to have abilities like teleportation and telekinesis. Can you imagine the amount of fun and what you could do with these abilities? It would be amazing. But when it comes down to the requirement for evidence, that's what's important to remember when it comes to truth claims. Believing these things are possible is all well and good, and if you really want to demonstrate that you can acquire the ability to telepathically control your environment, you have to test it to destruction. It is the only way. In essence, science. It works.